I'm Ken Sykes. I am the Senior Vice President of North State Bank, and I also serve as the Vice Chair of the North Carolina Secretary of State's E-Advisory Committee. Welcome to all. In our next session, we're going to talk about the incorporation of e-notes into the actual mortgage process today. And there's been incredible evolution over the last few years, and particularly, unfortunately, with the advance of the pandemic, we've seen a rapid accelerations and a lot of work going on to make sure that we can provide this platform in a safer, a better environment for our consumers and our realtors as well. We're delighted to have on our panel today Katie Thomas, who is a partner with Focus Public Affairs, and Katie is very involved in the real estate industry. She served as for 10 years from 2008 to 2019 as Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for the North Carolina Association of Realtors. Her duties include legislative duties, lobbying, regulatory compliance, and also serving as a representative from North Carolina to the National Association of Realtors. So great input from Katie there. We also have on our panel today, we welcome Scott Gillen. Scott is the Senior VP of Stewart Title and also the Executive Client Relationship. Stewart also serves on the Mortgage Bankers Association's Education Committee. He works exclusively with the larger accounts for Stewart Title and the attorneys and their real estate accounts to bring in regulatory compliance as well as the advancements of the electronic process into what we're doing in the mortgage industry today. So we're delighted to have Katie and Scott. I reached out to them earlier and said, let's talk about what it looks like to incorporate what you guys are doing into the process today. What opportunities are there? What challenges are there? What advancements have there been? How are you getting your real estate professionals as well as your title people involved in? Let's take a look at the inside of what it's like from Katie Thomas Gillen as you actually go out and put these things into process. So I'm going to turn it over to Katie, and then we'll turn it over to Scott.
My name is Katie Thomas, and I'm a partner with Focus Public Affairs in Raleigh, North Carolina. However, I'm also the chief lobbyist for the North Carolina Realtors. I'm excited to speak to you today about eClosings and other changes happening at the closing table. But before I do, I'm going to introduce Mark Saunders with Saunders Realty in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Mark is an expert in all the technology being used by brokers before they get to the closing table because so much has changed and it's all being accelerated with COVID-19. Mark is a graduate of Appalachian State University and has been a realtor since 2005. Mark, I'm going to let you start the presentation.
Hey, Katie and everyone. Thanks for having me here for your convention today. So a little bit about me. My name is Mark Saunders. I am a full-time realtor and property manager. I have two real estate firms in Winston-Salem, Saunders Realty, where we do residential sales, Saunders Property Management, where we do residential property management. And I also teach, I have a online real estate school called the Real Estate Brokers Academy, where we teach technology and CE across North Carolina. So, wow, this has been definitely a year of change, and COVID has changed our industry quite a bit. There's a couple different ways it has changed it in different parts of the industry. The big part that I see is definitely on the education side of things. You're seeing more and more conferences, just like you see here, going virtual, going remote, and making that all work, which is really cool because you can tie people in across the state of North Carolina now in one virtual call, which was very hard to do in live conferences. So that's definitely a plus. We're seeing some major changes in the real estate education, especially coming from the Real Estate Commission on real estate brokers, CE credits. How do they take classes? Those classes, a lot of them now are online. The mandatory update, Bick Up and Gin Up for the real estate agents as well. All of that has now gone online. And then in the real estate industry, especially residential sales, you're seeing agents and clients really adapting more to technology. And I think that's been coming for years now, but because of COVID, it really accelerated it. People now are adapting a whole lot quicker. Clients are more open now to doing virtual tours of properties. One of the largest programs that pretty much all the brokers use in North Carolina is called Showing Time. And they've actually a couple months ago rolled out a feature where you can do virtual showings of properties through Showing Time, the app. So the agent can go out to the property, just one person, walk through the property and do live streaming through the Showing Time app, which is a really, really cool feature. So that's definitely changing the communication way of real estate sales and everything. Agents that are doing really well are the ones that are adapting to these changes because it's coming so fast. On the property management side of things, we're definitely dealing with a lot of the executive orders that's come out regarding to rental payments and how we have to collect rental payments. And if people can't pay because of COVID, there's whole new rules that's come out of that, and that is changing daily. So it's been kind of a struggle to keep up with all the changes in the legislation, executive orders over COVID. And you're also seeing property managers having to adapt as well. I know in my personal business at our property management firm, we do a lot of inspections of our properties. We're learning how to do those more remote now, where the tenant actually takes their cell phone and walks through the property with us, and we can just keep everybody safe, but we can still protect our clients' property. So a lot of different areas, different ways that are changing. Another thing that I've noticed, especially going back to the education component of real estate, there is a lot of real estate brokers learning new tricks, new tips, really learning about this education. A lot of my technology classes, like the North Carolina GRI technology class, has been full. They're sold out in a lot of times because agents are really taking this time, if their business has slowed down a little bit, to learn new skills, learn new technology, and how to incorporate it in their business. So I'm excited. I think once we get through this period, agents are going to have a whole new skill set that they wanted to learn, never got around to doing it, but COVID caused them to really learn these tips and tools. And I think as an industry as a whole, when we get through all this, we're going to come out in a really, really good spot. So, Katie, I know you had a few more questions. I'm going to throw it back to you on what happens once it goes to the closing table in real estate and how COVID has changed all that. So I'm going to throw it right back to you, Katie.
Thank you, Mark. There really are a lot of changes happening with technology in the real estate industry. And since no one likes change, I'm going to talk about more change. As you are well aware, we already have the electronic closing process, and I hope you've done at least one of these transactions. Realtors who have used these transactions find them easy, convenient, they save on time, and they save on paper, and it allows them to continue to participate in the process. Additionally, brokers are already using a lot of online tools to execute contract documents. So this is a natural progression in the industry and in the process. Additionally, during COVID, we all know that we cannot congregate. This has limited the number of people at the traditional closing table, leaving the broker out of most closing transactions. Clients depend on their brokers for advice regarding the HUD statement or last-minute issues that arise, and they really do want them there down to the last signature to help them through the process. Using the electronic closing process allows everyone to remain at the table because everyone can be a part of the closing through the electronic process. Everyone is in the same room, as it may be, digital as it may be, but they're in the room, they can see the participants, they can hear what's going on, they can look at documents, they can watch people sign. It's all very safe and everybody feels included. This gives the clients a great deal of comfort, knowing that their person that is representing their interest is still participating in the process. COVID has also presented many other challenges when it comes to the real estate closing, especially earlier this year. People who could not get out of their homes because they either were infected or had a high risk of being infected, or who just didn't want to because they did not want to become infected with COVID, were prevented from getting to a traditional signing. So during the legislative session, we worked with a large group of stakeholders, including the Secretary of State's office and Secretary Marshall, to enact legislation allowing for emergency electronic notaries. This would allow a notary and a signatory to be on Zoom or Skype or another type of similar technology where the notary could verify the person's identity and watch them sign the documents. This process has been used a great deal during the pandemic, but it's not a permanent solution. This law actually expires March 1st of 2021. So what happens next? Because clearly we are not going to be done with this pandemic in March of 2021. So, with that understanding, the stakeholders have resumed their processes and are working together again on a permanent solution. This permanent solution is called Remote Online Notary, or RON. This would allow people to never have to sign another piece of paper during a closing. We could actually save some trees and build more houses. However, it cuts down on documents and it eliminates the needs to be in the same room. This will bring a great deal of ease to the process, as well as being a more environmentally friendly and faster process for a closing. Yet another sign of the times and the technology that is being accelerated due to the COVID pandemic. We are excited about moving forward with Ron and with the stakeholders and continuing to work for more opportunities in ways that technology can help shape and change and better the real estate industry. Additionally, we are hoping more lenders will use the electronic closing process to help encourage all closings to start happening this way. It is what the consumers really like and what we may need for a long time to come, thanks to COVID. With that, I'll turn it back over to Ken.
Katie, thank you very much for that deep dive and a good look at what's going on from a regulatory standpoint, what's going on actually from a standpoint of engaging with the real estate communities and the notaries and all the things that you're involved in, from helping write statutes and language. And we just thank you so much. And now I want to move on to Scott Gillum. And Scott, let's take a look at, from your industry, from the title industry, what it looks like as you engage with people, again, from a regulatory perspective, but also as well as service providers to bring and ensure that the title part of this equation is exactly what it should be.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate the intro. As Ken mentioned, my name is Scott Gillen. I'm with Stewart Title. I run the national agency group for Stewart. And for the last several years, have been principally involved in focusing on how we get Stewart off the ground to support digital closings, both with our direct offices, our agents, our attorney partners, anybody in the marketplace that's really focused on this digital strategy going forward. I thought what I'd start today with is maybe a quick overview of kind of how we got here. Stewart started doing digital closings back in 2006. At that point, the market was very fragmented. Technology really wasn't where it is today. Back in 2017, we kind of dusted it off, really looked at what was happening in the market, and started to pay attention to what we were seeing from the CFPB, from the GSEs, Fannie and Freddie, looking at digital initiatives, looking at the technology that was happening purely from a mortgage origination perspective in the real estate market, and start to make some plans on how we might support digital closings and digital initiatives going forward. So framing all that up, if we go back to 2017, North Carolina really kind of got ahead of the eight ball and really started working towards a digital process for closings when they adopted UETA, the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act, the Uniform Real Property Recording Act, and the Electronic Notarizations Act early in 2017. And then they did their first digital closing back in May of 2017. That was exciting at the time. It allowed an attorney to join remotely, allowed a couple of consumers to receive documents in advance, have those documents explained by the attorney in the presence of an e-notary who verified their identity and notarized the documents as they were signed electronically. Obviously, to facilitate that transaction, an e-note was used, and a mortgage was executed electronically and recorded electronically. So it's a big step forward for North Carolina. We made a big splash around it, and have really taken advantage of that. But now it's time to really look at the next step. North Carolina is a big state, more than 53,000 square miles, 10.5 million people. Very wide state in that it's 500 plus miles across. So I being from Texas, I look at some of the advantages we've seen here in Texas using digital closings and compare that to what could be done in North Carolina. North Carolina, as I said, has the infrastructure in place. By passing those acts, they've got more than 85% of their 100 counties accept e-recording. So while it was a leader in that digital space, moving forward now into 2020, they've really started to lose some ground, and we need to look at how does North Carolina keep up and moving forward. Since 2017, more than 30 states, or I think 30 states actually, have passed RON legislation. As I think everybody's probably aware, the first states to pass RON legislation were Virginia in 2011, I believe, 2012, and then Montana. What really changed that traction is Texas passing a law in 2017, it going live in 2018. And since then, MBA and Alta adopted and created a uniform law that has since been passed in the 30 states around the country, really putting the controls and the technology requirements in place to make not just the in-person electronic notarization work, but more importantly, the remote electronic notarization work. And that's really where we're seeing the traction going forward, and where I think North Carolina has some opportunities to move forward. So when we think about those 30 states, most of them are in the West and the Midwest. Where we haven't seen traction are states like North Carolina, where many of the closings are performed by lawyers, by law firms. The approved attorneys that do closings in states like North Carolina, Georgia, South Carolina, going up into the New England states, really haven't adopted looking at remote online processes in the same way. So I think that's the big opportunity for us. So I mentioned activity since 2017. If we go back to 2006, that's when the first e-notes were registered. Stewart actually registered the first e-notes in early 2006. Since then, we have now seen more than 836,000 e-notes completed as of the end of the last month. Most of those have been done, though, in the last 24 months. If I go back to the end of 2018, we did about 18,000 e-notes in 2018. But since then, and at that point, there were about 325,000 unique e-notes on the e-note registry. So you go back to from 2006 to 2018, 12 years, about 300,000 e-notes were done. And now we're at 836,000. So the number is expanding rapidly. Most of that has happened in the last 24 months. And this is largely a result of the expanding number of participants who are willing to work in that digital alternative space. So at this juncture, lenders that are approved to do e-notes, there's a total of 72 that are now approved, and that's up from the low 40s earlier this year. That's been driven by a lot of things, certainly COVID being one of them, but also the investors are starting to expand that will purchase an e-note. If we go back to the beginning, Fannie and Freddie were the only investors that would purchase an e-note. This year, we've seen Ginnie Mae come on board, and they'll be issuing their first securitization. We've also seen the federal home loan banks begin to allow smaller regional banks and credit unions to pledge an e-note as collateral. So with that, we're starting to see what we would anticipate would happen is the expansion of lenders saying, okay, now I can go. In addition to Fannie, Freddie, Ginnie, and the federal home loan banks, we've got 14 aggregators that are willing to buy an e-note, as well as 19 warehouse lenders, those banks that lend money to mortgage bankers so that they can make their loans. That's up to 19 warehouse banks. So we really are starting to see the challenges start to fall, and believe that going forward, we've got a huge amount of momentum to keep carrying this. So I get asked a lot, well, I don't see a lot of activity. What's happening in the market? Well, what we have seen this year, and a lot of this has been since March, is approximately 6% of all loans that are closed now are digitally closed. That's more than double what it was at the beginning of the year. So we're beginning to see that traction pick up and accelerate. And we're to the point now where we're seeing months of 50,000 plus electronic closings happening each month. And keep in mind, that's just tracking the e-notes. That's just tracking the lender activity where an e-note is actually being executed. But we are seeing a migration across the spectrum of utilizing digital alternatives. So what I mean by that is, for a long time, we've had realtors using digital processes like DocuSign to obtain signatures on contracts. That's been that way for many, many, many years. What happened in 2016 and 17 was mortgage companies really looking to leverage digital technologies for other means. And that came about largely because of the CFPB and the changes to Dodd-Frank that required the new CD and LE being issued. Lenders, because of the timelines required, had to initially get those initial disclosures signed and they started using electronic technologies to do so. That expanded into what we call point of sale systems. Point of sale systems are basically digital loan applications that allowed consumers to input all their information into the loan application, electronically submit documentation, as well as complete their loan application, basically creating a digital manufacturing process. Bearing in mind that that was from loan app up until closing. Fannie Mae during this period has also done a lot of surveys of consumers, and consumers have overwhelmingly 65, 70% or more have said they prefer a digital process. They prefer to complete a loan app at home on their own, and where they have access to their records, access to their documentation. While lenders have been doing that, we've also started to see the title companies get on board. So title companies are starting to use digital signing technologies in the pre-close process. So sending out documents in advance for consumers to sign to go get payoff requests and things like that have started proliferating as well. So maybe to frame this up a bit, at Stewart, which is obviously where I'm going to have the most background, we did our first RON in July of 2017. We didn't know what we were doing in July of 2017. We were experimenting, but we found that the process really made for an intriguing closing option that we've continued to look at going forward, and we've continued to expand. As I said, the number of digital RON closings is running about 50,000 a month. That what we don't count in that is how are we using RON and other means. So one of the questions that we hear a lot is we talk to lenders, we're not seeing that much activity. That doesn't mean we can't do them though, right? We've got documents throughout the closing process that need to be notarized. We've got cash transactions that we as a title company can control. There's no lender involved. I'm not dealing with lender documents. I've got seller side warranty deeds, things like that need executed and notarized as well. So we've been leveraging remote online notarization primarily for that. About 85% of the RON usage we do today, and it's well over 500 a month, are really for seller side and cash deals. The rest are lenders as they're starting to experiment with remote online notarization. And they are starting to embrace it. In a recent survey or number I heard from Fannie and Freddie, we're probably a little over 2% of loans being closed today are being closed by RON, and we'll continue to see that pick up. It's important to note now, though, that this is just a closing option. At the end of the day, we've always had a lot of different ways to close, many of which has been, in most cases, face-to-face interaction. What COVID did is it opened our eyes to make us realize that I have to find other ways because I can't be face-to-face with consumers. So closing attorneys, realtors, others have reached out to their settlement partners and said, how can I do this better? How can I make sure to protect the consumer? Because I can't have them in a face-to-face environment. We've obviously seen things like drive-through closings, plexiglass in offices, limited the number of people in the closing room, eliminating maybe realtors being in the closing room just to minimize the number of people in the room. So you've started to see changes. But what RON gives to us is the ability to take the closing to the consumer. We're able to leverage technology to validate and verify that consumer electronically and take the closing to them. What North Carolina realized when they did those first closings in 2017 is that an electronic closing allows documents to be delivered in advance, which means you have a more confident consumer signing documents at the closing table. Remote online notarization does the same thing, but it also takes the signing element electronically as well, allowing a consumer who has reviewed their documents to walk through the documents electronically with their attorney, with their title company, with their realtor on board if they'd like to have the realtor on board, with their lender, and walk through the documents and have them explained, and then obviously have them signed and executed. So the COVID effect has been very much helpful in expanding the role of remote online. Again, I mentioned the kind of the drive-by closings and things like that, but what we've seen since then through executive orders and otherwise is the ability to look at alternatives to the way to close. Passing RON legislation that supports standard technologies in place is critical, though. So North Carolina did pass what we call a remote ink signed executive order, which did help make sure that the closing process is continued. But there are faults or standards that don't exist in a RIN closing that really RON was designed to do. As I said, MISMO and through ALTA and MBA created a set of standards that include the technology, the recording, the knowledge-based authentication questions, the other technologies around the biometrics and ID validation, all are embedded in that standard document, and that is what's been adopted in every state. So as North Carolina looks closely at this going forward, we really need them to focus on making sure that all the protections that are in place with those standards are put in place for a consumer in North Carolina as well. So let's talk a little bit about where we go from here. What the opportunities are, what the future looks like, and maybe what some of the challenges are. So, as I said, right now, North Carolina was proven to be a leader. They were proven to be a leader in 2017. They really have the opportunity to be a leader amongst the attorney states and really push forward that Model RON legislation that supports the standard technology, supports the MISMO standards, ensures consistency in the process from one state to the other. What we want as an industry is a set of standards that no matter where I close a loan, for what lender I'm closing that loan, I can be assured that I can offer various closing options, whether that's coming into our office, whether we're still in COVID and we've got a drive-by, I'm sending a mobile notary out, or I'm offering a RON, remote online closing. I've got the same standards from one state to another. So I think North Carolina has a great opportunity to be a leader there. I think another opportunity that we need to look at industry-wide is right now we're very much reactionary. We're using these various closing options because somebody has concern about coming to our office. We wait to hear that perhaps they can't travel in, they might be out of the country, and they can't get into a consulate. Really, I think one of the major opportunities we have across the board is to make digital closings more of a go-to option, to educate the consumers what options are available to them, to sit down with our partners, our referral partners, like our realtors, our builder partners, our attorney partners. It's important that we are able to all be on the same page so that we can talk to a consumer and we all know what options are available. That consumer chooses or asks to be able to close differently, whether it's a scheduling issue or they're having to drive 200 miles to come to a closing. We know what options are available from that. Additionally, I would say one of the biggest opportunities is COVID. COVID opened our eyes to a different process, and it forced us as an industry to look at how do we close a consumer, how do we process a mortgage loan without the traditional face-to-face elements that we've had. We need to learn from that. We need to embrace that change. We need to make sure that we take advantage of what we've learned and grow from that. And again, we're not suggesting every consumer has to close this way. It's a tool in the toolbox. But it ultimately provides a level of security, a level of protection, a level of efficiency, and ultimately a level of consistency that will allow us to really change that process for that consumer and improve the overall process across the board. Now, those are the opportunities. Of course, we also have challenges. What's going to stop this expansion? I will tell you, one of the things, in my personal opinion, is going to stop the expansion is codifying what is now being called remote ink signed. There are a lot of areas where we can be challenged with a remote ink signed closing today. It has proven to be a great option in a pandemic environment where we've had to find a way to close, but that doesn't make it the right long-term solution because it doesn't provide the protections that a RON closing does. It leaves gaps for collateral control. We aren't identifying the consumers in the same way, so we really need to look at that closely and realize that. We did it for all the right reasons. That doesn't make it a permanent option. I'd also say one of the challenges that we see is just kind of complacency. What can we do to really look at this and embrace it? Don't be afraid of the process. We have endorsement from the Mortgage Bankers Association and from ALTA and from the Consumers Bankers Association. We've got security and technology and standards in place that make this an opportunistic way to close a loan. We have Fannie and Freddie and Ginnie and the Federal Home Loan Banks buying the product. So we really need to be cognizant of the fact that this has been thoroughly vetted, thoroughly tested. The investor community is comfortable with it. The consumers are getting comfortable with it, and take advantage of that and really work to educate everyone in the process. And I would say another challenge is constant improvement. we picked a set of standards that has knowledge-based authentication questions, and those authentication questions work well, but they're not perfect. We get 95% success on them, but you do have older consumers or younger consumers that have older credit profiles or have very little credit profile. That makes it a little more difficult. We have foreign nationals who don't have a credit profile, so we do have some challenges that we need to continue to focus on. And then I think it's also important to take what we've learned, what we know are opportunities and challenges, and really look at the future. So what should our goals be? I would tell you, and I would challenge everyone, that if we've gone from 2 or 3% at the beginning of this year to 6%, and we're sitting here in November, there is nothing to stop us from getting to double-digit digital closings. Quite frankly, I would be surprised if we weren't at 25% in 2 or 3 years, ultimately getting upwards to 40 or 50%. It's the right way to do it. We do things digitally all the time. We're using apps all the time. If you're signing a contract to buy a car, to buy a boat, your insurance contracts, all of that is done digitally today. There's nothing that should stop us from doing it on a real estate transaction. Keep in mind, 30+% of all consumers buying homes today are millennials. They grew up in a digital technology, a digital world. We're going to continue to see that expectation. We've created an expectation throughout the manufacturing process for a digital process, and we're killing it with a bunch of paper at closing. We need to realize that needs to change. I would also submit to you that it's not just a millennial issue. We all have very busy lives. This is a convenience issue as well. This is an accuracy issue as well. The first digital closing, the first RON closing that Stewart did in July of 2017 was for a 58 and 59-year-old couple. And they did it, number one, because they were excited to be the first, but secondarily, because they were in Chicago and they had a lot of traffic. Their closing was at 4 in the afternoon. And they were like, you mean I can go home and close? They were all over it. It was convenience for them. As I mentioned, most of the transactions today are refinance transactions. Well, a refinance transaction is a transaction that a consumer should be familiar with. That means they've already bought a house. They've probably bought and refinanced many times given the interest rate environment over the last many years. So using it and leveraging it for a consumer to be convenient for them when they're simply doing an interest rate reduction to lower their payments or shorten their term, whatever the case may be, that's a consumer that's already financially educated, already bought a house, already been through closing before. They don't need the same hand-holding that a first-time home buyer does. So I think we'll continue to see in the future a lot more activity around that. As I said, lenders are getting on board. We're seeing more and more of that lender activity. And I think that ultimately that is going to be the impetus to really drive this. We can control, at least from my perspective on the title side, I can only control transactions that I can control. I need, at the end of the day, as do consumers, we need more lenders to be on board, and we need more openness from the title community, obviously from the legal community, as well as education across the transaction partner network. Keep in mind, it's easy for us to talk about this holistically, but every transaction is its own story. Every transaction has its own counterparties. It has its own challenges. It's got its own issues relative to where the consumer is, where the property is. There's a story behind every single transaction. So while we can talk about this holistically and say, I as a lender want to do digital closings, or I want my title company to do digital closings, it really comes down to everybody involved in the transaction understanding the benefits of it and selling it early, understanding it early, and looking for cues, looking for opportunities to explain that concept to the consumer and get everybody on board. Because ultimately, it is a better process for all the counterparties, speeds up the process, it's more secure, it's more accurate, and it's better overall for the marketplace. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Ken and let him introduce the next speaker.
Katie and Scott, thank you for that wonderful presentation, and we really did get a great look at what's going on, and from a perspective of the real-time perspective of what's going on within the real estate industry and the title industry as we engage more in the electronic process. So thank you for that. We've had some questions and come in from our audience, and so we're going to take some time now to field some questions, and we can ask Katie and Scott to give us some answers to some of the questions you just sent in. So let's go to the Q&A part of our session right now.